In 1605, a French navigator named Samuel de Champlain documented something that would change European agriculture forever. He recorded a single crop feeding entire indigenous nations through winters that killed everything else. Winters where temperatures dropped to 40 degrees. Winters that lasted 6 months. Winters where corn stores ran out, where game disappeared, where survival depended on one thing: food that didn't die when the snow came. Champlain watched families dig through frozen ground in February and pull out fresh tubers, still sweet, still nutritious, still alive underground. He wrote that this crop made famine impossible. But when you search for this crop in modern agricultural databases today, you won't find it listed under staple foods. You won't find it in the USDA's Priority Crop Index. You won't find universities researching how to improve its yields or develop new varieties. You'll find it buried in a category reserved for invasive species, nuisance plants, and agricultural problems requiring eradication. They reclassified the crop that made famine impossible as a threat to modern farming. They took survival itself and turned it into a weed. Champlain's journal listed the foods that sustained the northeastern tribes through the harshest climate in North America: corn planted in mounds, dried on the cob, stored in bark-lined pits; beans, threaded on strings, hung in longhouses, preserved through winter; squash, cut into strips, dried over fires, reconstituted in spring stews. The three sisters, planted together in perfect rotation, each feeding the soil for the next. This was annual agriculture at its peak. Every spring you planted, every fall you harvested, every winter you rationed. The cycle was predictable, the cycle was controllable, the cycle was temporary. But there was a fourth crop in Champlain's notes, one that didn't fit the pattern. It wasn't annual. It didn't die after harvest. It didn't require replanting every spring. It appeared in a completely different section of his journal, not under cultivated foods, but under permanent infrastructure, listed alongside stone fish weirs that lasted generations, alongside fire pits built once and used for decades, alongside things you inherit, not things you plant. He called it a root that returns without asking. That wasn't a crop description. That was a description of something that had transcended agriculture entirely. That crop was the sunchoke, the infinite vegetable. And for 3 centuries, it redefined what food security actually meant. The Haudenosaunee called it kaishukon wi, the root that returns. Their oral histories don't place it in agricultural origin stories. They place it at creation itself. When Sky Woman fell from the celestial realm and landed on Turtle's back, her body became the earth. From her hands grew corn. From her heart grew tobacco. From her feet grew the root. That would never stop giving. This wasn't folklore about farming. This was cosmology. The sunchoke was considered as fundamental to existence as the ground itself. The Algonquin tribes didn't store it in the same way they stored corn or beans. They left it in the ground. The earth was the storage. When Lewis and Clark nearly starved crossing the Great Plains in November 1805, their journals record desperation. Game had vanished. Their flour supplies were down to 20 pounds for 30 men. They were rationing 1 biscuit per person per day. Sacagawea saved them by finding something the explorers didn't recognize: a mouse cache. Prairie mice gather sunchokes every fall, storing them in underground chambers for winter. 1 cache contained 14 quarts of tubers, enough to feed the entire expedition for 3 days. Clark wrote, "These roots are palatable and nutritious, equal to any root I have ever tasted." They were eating food that had been stored by animals, food that mice knew was reliable enough to bet their winter survival on. A single Haudenosaunee family's annual supply could fill 12 bushel baskets, roughly 480 pounds of food from 1 patch that never had to be replanted. That wasn't agriculture. That was permanence. When European settlers first encountered sunchokes, they didn't understand what they were looking at. They assumed it was a cultivated crop that required annual planting. It took years before they realized the indigenous people weren't planting anything. They were just harvesting from patches their grandparents had established. 1 planting, decades of food, generations of security. Champlain sent samples back to France in 1607. By 1613, French botanist Charles de Lecluse was growing them in botanical gardens and distributing roots across Europe. By 1617, Italian estates were cultivating them not as experiments, but as strategic food reserves. The Farnese family in Parma planted sunchokes across their territory as famine insurance. When crop failures hit Italy in 1621, sunchoke patches that had been planted a decade earlier fed entire villages. By 1629, English herbalist John Parkinson wrote in Paradisi in Sole Paradisus Terrestris that sunchokes had spread throughout every garden in London, from the nobility to common households. He described them as more nourishing than potatoes, and requiring far less attention. This wasn't novelty. This was infrastructure. The wealthy planted them once on their estates, and their grandchildren inherited the harvest. Records from the Burghley House estate in Lincolnshire show continuous sunchoke harvests from 1630 to 1702, without a single replanting. 72 years of food from one initial planting. And then, between 1880 and 1920, something impossible happened. Sunchokes vanished from commercial agriculture across Europe and North America. Not slowly, not gradually. Within a single generation, a crop that had been feeding millions for 3 centuries disappeared from the food system entirely. In 1880, the Burpee Seed Company catalog listed 6 varieties of sunchokes, with detailed growing instructions and testimonials from farmers reporting yields of 8 to 12 tons per acre, with no fertilizer required. By 1895, they listed 3 varieties with a note: demand declining. By 1910, sunchokes appeared on page 47, in small print, listed under specialty items for adventurous gardeners. By 1925, they were gone from the catalog entirely. Not a single variety, not even a mention in the index. This wasn't crop failure. The yields were higher than ever. University agricultural stations in New York, Ohio, and Ontario documented record sunchoke harvests throughout the 1910s. The Ohio Agricultural Experiment Station recorded an astonishing finding in 1918. Sunchokes produced 64,000 pounds of food per acre without irrigation, compared to 40,000 pounds per acre for potatoes with irrigation. They concluded, for sheer productive capacity, few crops rival the sunchoke. So why did it vanish? The same year that report was published, the Sears, Roebuck, and Cummer agricultural catalog removed sunchokes entirely and replaced that section with expanded listings for certified seed potatoes, guaranteed uniform size for commercial sale. Land-grant universities stopped researching sunchoke varieties and redirected funding toward potato breeding programs focused on one goal: standardization. By 1930, agricultural extension offices across the United States stopped recommending sunchokes to farmers. By 1950, most Americans under 30 had never heard of them. An entire crop erased from cultural memory in 3 decades. That erasure was not accidental. It was systematic. It was engineered. And it left a paper trail. This is not a story about a vegetable. This is a story about what happens when a crop solves too many problems at once. About what happens when food doesn't require the systems built to sell it. About how an entire industry had to make you forget the sunchoke ever existed. Because if you remember, their entire business model collapses. The archive opens in 1943. World War II is raging. The United States is mobilizing every resource for total war, including agriculture. The U.S. Department of Agriculture publishes a bulletin titled Wartime Food Production: Maximizing Yields on American Farms. The entire document is focused on increasing food output to feed both military personnel and allied nations facing starvation. Every major crop gets detailed coverage: wheat, corn, potatoes, soybeans, even turnips and rutabagas. Victory gardens are being promoted nationally. The message is clear: grow anything that produces calories. Sunchokes are mentioned exactly once, a single paragraph, buried on page 127, in a subsection most farmers would never read. Not in the section on staple crops, not in emergency rations, not in high-yield alternatives. They appear under a heading that sounds bureaucratic and meaningless: crops requiring special handling for market distribution. The language is careful, clinical. It reads, Jerusalem artichokes, Helianthus tuberosus, produce yields comparable to or exceeding potato production in northern climates. However, these tubers resist standardization efforts necessary for wholesale market distribution. Irregular sizing, variable maturity, dates, and rapid post-harvest deterioration complicate supply chain logistics. Recommendation: suitable for home garden production only. Read that again. Resist standardization efforts. Not fail to grow. Not produce poor yields. They resist standardization. The crop was too successful in the wrong ways. It produced too much food, but that food couldn't be controlled, sorted, shipped, and sold through the infrastructure that had been built to distribute other crops. The problem wasn't the sunchoke. The problem was that the system couldn't process abundance that refused to cooperate. Here's what sunchokes actually do, and why every claim here can be verified in peer-reviewed agricultural studies that universities conducted but never promoted. You plant a single tuber in October. Just one. Push it 4 inches into the soil. It doesn't matter if the soil is rich or depleted. Sunchokes thrive in clay, sand, loam, even slightly alkaline soils with pH up to 8.0. By April, a shoot emerges. By July, that shoot has grown 8 to 12 feet tall, taller than corn, taller than any annual vegetable. The stalk is thick, fibrous, topped with bright yellow flowers that bloom from August through October. Those flowers are food for pollinators. But they're not why you planted it. The treasure is underground. In November, after the first hard frost kills the above-ground plant, you dig carefully. What you find looks alien. Knobby, irregular tubers clustered around the original planting site, each one pale cream to reddish purple, covered in thin skin, ranging from the size of a walnut to the size of your fist. If you planted one tuber, you harvest 15 to 25. That's a 15 to 25-fold return in a single season. But here's the trick that changes everything. You don't harvest all of them. Leave 3 tubers in the ground. Cover them back up. Walk away. Next October, you return to the same spot. Those 3 tubers have each produced 20 more. You now have 60. The following year, 1,200. By year 5, a single 10 by 10 foot patch produces more tubers than a family of 4 can consume in a year. One planting. Infinite returns. That's not agriculture. That's a permanent food system that requires zero maintenance. The nutritional profile is what makes this unforgivable. Per 100 grams of raw sunchoke, 73 calories, 2 grams of protein, 17 grams of carbohydrates, 1.6 grams of fiber. But those numbers don't tell the real story. The carbohydrate is primarily inulin, a type of fiber that doesn't behave like starch. Inulin passes through your stomach and small intestine undigested. It reaches your colon intact, where it feeds beneficial bacteria like bifidobacterium and lactobacillus. These bacteria ferment the inulin and produce short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionate, acetate. These compounds reduce inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and may prevent colon cancer. Sunchokes contain 76% inulin by dry weight. That makes them the richest dietary source of this prebiotic fiber on Earth. For comparison, chicory root contains 68%, garlic contains 17%, onions contain 8%. Nothing comes close. When researchers at the University of Guelph analyzed sunchoke tubers in 2009, they concluded the inulin content suggests significant potential for managing blood glucose levels and supporting gut microbiome health. That study was published. It was never promoted. No follow-up funding was allocated. The research died quietly. The tubers also contain potassium, 429 millimoles per 100 green, more than bananas. Iron, 3.4 milli. Thiamine, niacin, and vitamin C. They're naturally gluten-free, low glycemic index, estimated GI of 50 compared to potatoes at 85, and can be eaten raw, roasted, boiled, pickled, or dried into flour. Indigenous peoples knew this 4,000 years ago. Scientists confirmed it 15 years ago. Supermarkets still don't sell them. Now the cultivation data. Sunchokes survive. Temperatures down to 30 degrees in Tufts, 34 degrees. They grow successfully in USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9, covering 90% of the United States, most of Canada, and all of Europe. They require 6 to 8 inches of annual rainfall. Potatoes require 20 inches. Corn requires 25 inches. In drought years, when conventional crops fail, sunchokes just slow their growth and wait. When rain returns, they resume. They don't die. They don't need to be replanted. They just wait. Field trials at Cornell University. In 2003 documented sunchoke yields. 60,000 pounds per acre in upstate New York without irrigation, without fertilizer, without pesticide application. The same year, the same location, potato yields were 42,000 pounds per acre with irrigation, nitrogen fertilization, and fungicide treatment for late blight. The sunchokes produced 43% more food using zero inputs. The study was published in the Journal of Sustainable Agriculture. It was cited 11 times. No major agricultural institution has attempted to replicate it or scale it. The data exists. The system ignores it. Sunchokes require no pesticides because almost nothing eats them. The tubers contain compounds that deter most insect larvae and fungal pathogens. They're naturally disease-resistant. They need no fertilizer because their roots form symbiotic relationships with mycorrhizal fungi that help them access nutrients other plants can't reach. They fix their own nitrogen through bacterial associations in the soil. They improve soil structure wherever they grow, breaking up compacted earth with their extensive root systems. They're not extractive, they're regenerative. Every year they grow, the soil gets better. So if this crop produces more food than potatoes, survives harsher conditions than corn, requires zero chemical inputs, and feeds the soil instead of depleting it. Why don't we grow it? While sunchokes were disappearing from commercial agriculture, something else was being systematically engineered. The modern potato, not the diverse, colorful Andean varieties that indigenous peoples had cultivated for 8,000 years. A new potato, designed specifically for industrial distribution. Between 1900 and 1950, agricultural researchers at land-grant universities across North America and Europe selected potato varieties for very specific traits, not nutrition, not flavor, not resilience. They selected for logistics. Here's what they needed. Uniform. Size. Every tuber had to be within 2 ounces of the same weight, so they could be sorted mechanically and sold by standardized weight classes. Synchronized maturity. The entire field had to ripen within a 7-day window, so harvest could be completed with industrial equipment in a single pass. Thick skin. The skin had to be tough enough to survive mechanical diggers, conveyor belts, transport trucks, and weeks of handling without bruising or breaking. High starch content. The tubers needed enough starch to store for 6 to 9 months in climate-controlled warehouses without sprouting or rotting. Shallow eyes. The eyes, growth nodes, had to be shallow so mechanical peeling equipment could remove skin efficiently in industrial processing facilities. Round or oval shape. Irregular shapes jammed mechanical sorting equipment. Uniformity was mandatory. Every single trait was optimized for one thing: fitting into the industrial supply chain that was being built in the early 20th century. Not better food, better logistics. The russet Burbank potato, developed in 1902 and still the dominant variety in North America, was bred specifically to meet these criteria. It's not the most nutritious potato. It's not the best tasting potato. It's the potato that survives mechanized industrial agriculture. Sunchokes violated every single requirement. Each tuber is a different size, some the size of marbles, others the size of apples, all from the same plant. They mature over a 6-week window, not 7 days. Some are ready in October, others in December. You can't harvest a sunchoke field in one pass. You have to return multiple times. Their skin is thin, papery, easily damaged. They last 4 days after harvest before they start to wrinkle and lose moisture. They can't be stored for months. They have irregular, knobby shapes that jam sorting machines. From a nutritional standpoint, they're superior. From an industrial standpoint, they're impossible. Here's the invisible rule that governs every supermarket. Crops must arrive looking identical, ripen on schedule, and survive a 2-week journey from field to shelf. Sunchokes violate all 3. Each tuber is a different size. Some are ready in October, others in December. They last 4 days after digging before they start to wrinkle. That 4-day window is why they disappeared. Not because people stopped wanting them, because the system they were sold through couldn't handle them. But there's a deeper problem. A problem that explains not just why sunchokes disappeared, but why they had to disappear. Sunchokes eliminate recurring revenue. They break the subscription model that modern agriculture is built on. Here's how the system actually works. Not the system they teach in schools. The real system. Step 1. A farmer buys certified seed potatoes. These aren't just any potatoes. They're specially produced seed stock, certified disease-free, sold at premium prices. In 2024, certified seed potatoes cost $0.45 to $0.80 per pound. A farmer needs 2,000 to 2,500 pounds of seed per acre. That's $900 to $2,000 just for seed, every single year. Step 2. The farmer plants the seed potatoes. They grow. They produce a harvest. But here's the critical part. The farmer cannot save those harvested potatoes to replant next year. Technically, they could. Legally, many seed potato contracts prohibit it. Practically, saved potatoes accumulate. Viruses and diseases over successive generations, reducing yields by 20 to 40%. So the farmer has no choice. Next year, they buy certified seed again. Step 3. This cycle repeats forever. Buy seed, plant, harvest, sell, buy seed again. The seed companies have captured recurring revenue. Every single farmer, every single acre, every single year. That's not a flaw in the system. That's the foundation of the business model. Now here's how sunchokes work and why they represent an existential threat to that model. Step 1. You buy sunchoke tubers once, or you don't buy them at all. You get 3 tubers from a neighbor who grew them from tubers their grandmother planted in 1960. Step 2. You plant those 3 tubers. They grow. In November, you harvest 60 tubers. You eat 30. You replant 3. You give 27 to friends and neighbors. Step 3. Next year, those 3 tubers become 60 again. You harvest, eat, replant, share. This cycle repeats for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. Never buy seed again. Your children never buy seed again. The tubers just keep multiplying, keep producing, keep feeding, without requiring a single dollar of input after the initial planting. That's not agriculture as the system defines it. That's a permanent exit from the customer base. The sunchoke doesn't just reduce seed purchases. It eliminates them entirely, forever, for generations. Now scale that across millions of acres. If American farmers shifted just 10% of potato acreage to sunchokes, that's $180 million in lost annual seed sales. But it's worse, because sunchokes also eliminate fertilizer sales. They fix nitrogen, pesticide sales. They resist pests naturally. And irrigation costs. They survive on rainfall. The entire input supply chain loses revenue. The sunchoke represents a business model failure for every company that depends on farmers needing to buy products year after year. And in 2024, that's a $68 billion industry globally. Seed companies, fertilizer manufacturers, pesticide producers, irrigation equipment suppliers, storage facility operators, transportation logistics. Every segment of industrial agriculture depends on crops that die after harvest and require replacement. The sunchoke doesn't die. It multiplies. That makes it a structural threat to the entire economic model. Today, the global potato industry generates $127 billion annually. That's not gross revenue. That's the value of the entire potato economy. Fresh potatoes, processed products, frozen fries, chips, and every derivative product. But the real money isn't in selling potatoes to consumers. The real money is in selling inputs to farmers. Here's where the billions actually flow. Seed potato sales, $4.8 billion annually worldwide. Every farmer, every year, buying certified seed stock. Seed potato companies like Germacopa, HZPC, and Agrico control this market. They breed new varieties, patent them when possible, and sell seed under contracts that often prohibit saving and replanting. The farmer becomes a permanent customer. That's not an accident. That's the design. Fertilizer. Potatoes are heavy feeders. They extract nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium from soil faster than almost any other crop. A typical potato farm applies 150 to 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. At current prices, that's $90, $120 per acre annually. Across 45 million acres of global potato cultivation, that's $4.1 to $5.4 billion in fertilizer. Sales every single year. Sunchokes fix their own nitrogen. They need no fertilizer. That's $5 billion in lost revenue if farmers switched. Pesticides and fungicides. Late blight, the same disease that caused the Irish potato famine, still threatens potato crops worldwide. Farmers spray fungicides 10-15 times per season. Colorado potato beetles require insecticides. Potato viruses require purchasing new certified seed. The global potato pesticide market is worth $1.3 billion annually. Sunchokes are naturally resistant to the pests and diseases that attack potatoes. They require no chemical protection. Another $1 billion of lost sales. Irrigation equipment. Potatoes need consistent moisture. Drip irrigation systems, pivot systems, pumps, pipes. The infrastructure to water potato fields represents billions in equipment sales and ongoing energy costs. Sunchokes survive on rainfall. They don't need irrigation systems. That equipment becomes obsolete. Storage. Facilities. Potatoes must be stored at 45 to 50 degrees F in climate-controlled warehouses with humidity management. The construction and operation of these facilities represents billions in capital investment. Sunchokes can't be stored this way. They're harvested fresh as needed, left in the ground until you're ready to eat them. Those massive storage warehouses become unnecessary. Processing equipment, French fry production lines, chip slicing machines, peeling equipment, all designed for uniform potato shapes and sizes. Billions of dollars in industrial equipment calibrated for potatoes specifically. Sunchokes don't fit. The machines would need to be redesigned or replaced. The existing equipment loses value. Add it all up. Over $15 billion in annual revenue tied directly to potato dependency. Seed, fertilizer, pesticides, irrigation, storage, processing. Every segment profits from the fact that potatoes die after harvest, require intensive inputs, and need industrial infrastructure. The sunchoke requires none of it. It just grows, produces, and multiplies without asking permission. That's why it disappeared. Not because it failed, because it succeeded in ways that generated zero profit for the industrial system that had been built around other crops. The linguistic manipulation is so complete that most people don't even notice it happened. Language is how systems control perception. Change the words, change the reality. In 17th century European botanical texts, sunchokes were called artichokes du Canada, the artichoke of Canada. That was the standard, the reference point. When botanists needed to describe potatoes, which were new and unfamiliar to Europe, they called them Virginia truffles or earth apples, always defined in relation to something else. Sunchokes were the original, potatoes were the alternative. By 1750, that relationship was reversing. Potatoes were becoming potatoes, a simple, clear name that required no explanation. Sunchokes were being called Jerusalem artichokes, a name that makes no sense. They're not from Jerusalem. They're not related to artichokes. Linguistic historians believe Jerusalem is a corruption of girasole, the Italian word for sunflower. English speakers mispronounced it, and the name stuck. But notice what the confusion does. It makes the plant sound foreign, exotic, unclear, something that belongs elsewhere, not here. By 1850, agricultural manuals still listed sunchokes, but the language had shifted. An 1847 British farming guide describes them as a useful addition to the root cellar, though inferior in taste and keeping quality to the potato. Inferior. That's new. For 2 centuries, they were described as superior. Now they're inferior. What changed? Not the plant. The infrastructure changed. Potatoes fit the new system. Sunchokes didn't, so the language changed to match the system. By 1920, sunchokes had been reclassified entirely. The 1921 USDA Yearbook of Agriculture mentions them once, in a section titled Minor Root Vegetables for Experimental Cultivation. Minor, not staple, not essential, minor. The crop that had fed indigenous nations for millennia, that had sustained European estates for 3 centuries, had been demoted to minor. Potatoes, meanwhile, were in the section titled Essential Staple Crops for National Security. The linguistic reversal was complete. The original became the alternative. The staple became the novelty. The superior crop became the inferior option. And because language shapes memory, an entire generation grew up believing potatoes were natural, essential, and obvious, while sunchokes were strange, optional, and forgettable. Agricultural extension guides from the 1930s stopped mentioning sunchokes entirely. Land-grant universities removed them from crop rotation studies. Seed catalogs moved them from the root vegetables section to ornamentals, something you plant for decoration, not food. By 1950, if you found sunchokes in a catalog at all, they were listed next to dahlias and canna lilies. The most productive perennial vegetable in North American history was reclassified as a flower. That's not gradual change, that's systematic erasure. And it happened in full view, documented in agricultural publications, with no one questioning why the language was changing so rapidly. Because language changes slowly when culture changes naturally. Language changes quickly when systems engineer it to change. But here's what the system couldn't erase. Perennials don't ask permission. They don't check market trends. They don't consult agricultural policy. They just grow. And sunchokes are still growing everywhere the system tried to forget them. They're in abandoned farm fields across Ohio and Pennsylvania, where families planted them in the 1890s and then left for factory jobs in the cities. The farms were sold. The houses collapsed. The barns rotted. But every October, yellow flowers still bloom 10 feet tall where the gardens used to be. The families are gone. The knowledge is gone. The sunchokes never left. They're spreading through ditches along rural highways in Quebec, where French-Canadian farmers planted them before World War II. Highway departments mow them down in July. By August, they're 12 feet tall again. The maintenance crews call them weeds. They spray herbicides. The sunchokes come back denser the next year. You can't kill what refuses to die. They're thriving on the edges of suburban parking lots in Ontario, growing through cracks in asphalt where no one planted anything. They're in urban community gardens in Detroit, Minneapolis, and Portland, where elderly gardeners who learned about them from their grandparents quietly maintain patches in corner plots. They're in the hedgerows of England, the abandoned estates of France, the edges of forests in Italy, where wealthy families planted them 300 years ago. The estates changed hands. The families died out. The sunchokes are still there. In France, after World War II ended in 1945, People refused to eat sunchokes for decades. An entire generation associated them with occupation, with Nazi food requisitions, with the darkest years of the century. Grandparents who had survived on topinambur during the war would not allow them in their homes. Never again, they said. The emotional rejection was absolute. But the plants didn't care about human trauma. They kept growing in the gardens of Normandy, in the abandoned plots of Lyon, in the forest where refugees had planted them for safety. The generation that hated them died. Their children had no memory of the war. And by 2010, young French chefs rediscovered topinambur, not as trauma food, not as emergency rations, as heritage, as something their great-grandparents knew that had been forgotten, as something delicious that grew without asking for anything. Today, high-end restaurants in Paris serve topinambur soup as a winter delicacy. Farmers' markets in Provence sell them next to heirloom tomatoes and artisanal cheeses. The plant waded through 3 generations of rejection and returned when the memory of suffering had faded enough for people to taste the food again without tasting the war. That's what perennials do. They wait. Knowledge always waits. Bringing it back is simpler than you think. Simpler than the system wants you to believe. Because if growing your own food was actually difficult, they wouldn't need to convince you it is. You can order organic sunchoke tubers online right now for $6 to $12 per pound. You need 3 tubers to start. That's it. Less than $5 of actual tubers. Or you find someone growing them. Check farmers markets in October and November. Ask if they're selling tubers for planting. Most growers have more than they know what to do with, and will give you 3 for free. That's how perennials spread. Through gifting, through knowledge shared outside market systems. Here's exactly what you do. Step 1. Choose your location. Sunchokes aren't picky. They grow in full sun or partial shade. They tolerate clay soil, sandy soil, rocky soil, slightly alkaline soil. The only place they struggle is waterlogged swamps. If the ground drains at all, they'll grow. Pick a spot where 10-foot-tall plants won't shade things you care about. Back corners work. Along fence lines. Anywhere you'd plant something permanent. Step 2. Plant in October or early November, after the first frost, but before the ground freezes. Dig a hole 4 inches deep. Drop in a tuber. Cover it with soil. Space multiple tubers 18 to 24 inches apart. Water once, thoroughly, to settle the soil. Then walk away. Do not fertilize. Do not add compost. Do not amend the soil. They don't need it. Trying to help just wastes effort. Step 3. Wait. Through winter, nothing happens. The tuber is dormant underground. In April or early May, depending on your climate, a shoot emerges. It looks like asparagus at first. Thick, purple-green, slightly hairy. Don't touch it. Let it grow. By June, it's 3 feet tall. By July, 8 feet. By August, it flowers. Those yellow blooms attract bees, butterflies, and beneficial insects. Let them. Step 4. In November, after the first hard frost kills the above-ground plant, cut the dead stalks down to 6 inches. This makes the patch easier to work with. Now dig. Carefully. Start 12 inches away from where you planted and work inward. The tubers form in a cluster around the original planting site. You'll find 15 to 25 tubers from a single plant. They're knobby, irregular, covered in thin reddish-brown skin. Harvest what you want to eat immediately. Leave at least 3 tubers in the ground, covered with soil. Step 5. Eat what you harvested within a week. Sunchokes don't store like potatoes. They're fresh food. Scrub them clean. Don't peel them. The skin is thin and edible. Slice them thin and eat raw in salads for a crunchy, slightly sweet taste like water chestnuts. Roast them with olive oil and salt at 400 degrees for 25 minutes for a caramelized, nutty flavor. Boil and mash them like potatoes. Pickle them in vinegar. Add them to soups. Dry and grind them into flour. Step 6. Next October, return to the same spot. Those 3 tubers you left have multiplied. You now have 60. Harvest what you need. Leave 3. Repeat forever. That's it. That's the entire process. No weeding. Sunchokes outcompete everything. No watering, they survive on rainfall. No fertilizing, they fix their own nitrogen. No pest control, nothing bothers them. You plant once, and you harvest for decades. Your children inherit the patch. That's not gardening, that's infrastructure. That's food independence. And food independence is the one thing the industrial system cannot tolerate, because once you have it, you stop needing them. If this changed how you see potatoes in the supermarket, then you've already realized something that goes far beyond food. You're not buying vegetables. You're buying into a system designed around planned obsolescence, around products engineered to die so you buy again, around dependence that generates profit. The sunchoke breaks that cycle. It produces without permission. It spreads without approval. It feeds without requiring anything in return. And that's precisely why it had to be erased. Not because it failed, because it succeeded in ways that couldn't be controlled, sold, or taxed. Every time you see a potato in a store, you're looking at a century of agricultural engineering designed not to feed you better, but to feed you in ways that generate recurring revenue. Uniform size so they can be mechanically sorted and sold by weight class. Synchronized maturity so they can be harvested with expensive equipment that farmers must buy or rent. Thick skin so they survive industrial handling. High starch so they store in warehouses owned by distributors. Every trait was selected to fit the system, not to fit your body. The sunchoke was the opposite. It fit your body. It fit your soil. It fit your climate. It just didn't fit the system. And when a crop doesn't fit the system doesn't change. The crop is erased. But erasure is never complete, because perennials don't forget. They wait underground. They wait for someone to remember that food used to mean something different, that agriculture used to mean something different, that abundance didn't always require permission from corporations, approval from regulators, or purchases from supply chains. The infinite vegetable was never a problem. It was a solution so complete, so permanent, so independent that it threatened every business model built on selling you things you have to buy again next year. That's not a conspiracy. That's just economics. Systems optimize for their own survival, not yours. And a crop that makes you independent is a crop that makes you unprofitable. But you can't unprofitable something that grows without asking. You can only try to make people forget it exists. They tried. For a century, they tried. And it almost worked. Almost. But the plants are still here. The knowledge is still here. And now you know. Subscribe to the Power Roots. This is not about nostalgia. This is about excavating the food systems that were systematically buried because they worked too well. We're digging up the crops that fed civilizations for millennia, that required nothing, that gave everything, and that disappeared the moment they threatened profit margins. The sunchoke was just the beginning. There are others, perennials that produce for decades, crops that fix their own nitrogen, plants that survive droughts, floods, and freezes while producing. More nutrition than anything in a supermarket. They all disappeared for the same reason. They were too good at feeding people and not good enough at generating revenue. Every crop we uncover is a crack in the system that wants you dependent. Every plant that grows without asking permission is proof that abundance was never supposed to require a subscription. The next route opens soon, and it's bigger than this one.